What's going on, guys? Welcome back. And I know it's been a while since I've made a video on anything Star Wars related, let alone a Star Wars book. So today I will be amending that by bringing you my book review of Star Wars Brotherhood by Mike Chen, one of the newest Star Wars books which released a few months back and that I finally got around to finishing a few days ago. You guys remember how they made an entire film based on a throwaway line from A New Hope? Well, this book continues the trend of Star Wars stories being based on throwaway lines from the films, because the entire plot of this book is based on this line from Revenge of the Sith.
You owe me one, and not for saving your skin for the 10th time.
9th time. That business on Cato and Amodia doesn't count.
To give you guys a little bit more information than that, this book takes place shortly after the events of Attack of the Clones, going into the Clone War. Following a terrorist attack on Cato and Amodia, Obi-Wan is dispatched to the planet to investigate and bring to justice those responsible. However, he encounters many obstacles along the way, including an enemy that any Clone Wars fan will be familiar with. Meanwhile, Anakin is trying to figure out the kind of person he wants to be in this brewing conflict, and the role he has to take on may just be that of a teacher. Now, you guys know that I have a complicated history with Star Wars canon books. I absolutely love the Thrawn series and Master and Apprentice, the Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan focused book. But aside from those, none of them have really impressed me. I thought Ahsoka and Tarkin were both incredibly mediocre, and the Kanan book, A New Dawn, I thought was straight up bad. Which is why I don't want to sound hyperbolic while saying this, but this might just be my favorite Star Wars canon book. And that's not because it's the newest one. I'm not the kind of person to say that newer is better or anything like that. And it's not that at all. As a matter of fact, I wouldn't even say this is necessarily better than the Thrawn series. But for what this book was trying to be, I think it's practically perfection. It adds to the overarching story and characters while being an entertaining read on its own. There may be mild spoilers throughout this review, but I'll try to keep them minimal. But just forewarning you, I may give away a few minor plot details here and there, so if you're afraid of that, don't ruin the experience for yourself, because this book is absolutely fantastic. One of the things I thought this book did extremely well was connecting itself to every different form of Star Wars media, from the films to the shows, the other books, even the video games. I can't think of another Star Wars project that has done that as of late. What I mean by that is that it feels like certain Star Wars products are designed to appeal only to a specific type of fan. For example, The Mandalorian, while having a lot of fan service thrown in for the Clone Wars and Rebels, also feels like the character of Ahsoka is written to be extremely out of character for a more general audience who isn't as familiar with her character. The Star Wars sequels were also designed to appeal to the lowest common denominator of Star Wars fans who only care about seeing nostalgic things from the original trilogy. In fact, their nostalgia got so bad to the point where they completely contradicted the entire character arc of Anakin Skywalker, with him redeeming himself and bringing balance to the Force, by having Palpatine come back with no explanation or rhyme or reason behind it. But this book, on the other hand, uses fan service in a more subtle way which fits within the story. For example, they reference Satine Kryze, Obi-Wan's former lover, at several points throughout the book, and at the end of it, we see her declaration of Mandalore's neutrality during the war. That is something which was referenced several times in the Clone Wars show, so it only makes sense that we would see it in this book that shows us the beginnings of the war. And my favorite reference comes from this moment. He continued watching Anakin, who took a moment to gather himself before stopping to talk with Jaro Tapal and the red-haired youngling who trailed him. To the average reader, this means absolutely nothing. But to people like me, who are fans of the game Jedi Fallen Order, we of course know that the red-haired youngling in question is none other than Cal Kestis. I love the way they handled this, because it isn't treated like a big moment or some huge character cameo, Because, of course, to these larger-than-life heroes like Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker, Cal Kestis would be nothing more than a simple red-haired youngling. But they included this for us, the fans, to validate Jedi Fallen Order as a part of this epic story. As I just stated, this book fits very well into the overarching story of Star Wars, and I never thought that the time between Attack of the Clones and the beginning of the Clone Wars would be that interesting of a time period, but this book makes it interesting. We see the introduction of Asajj Ventress, how she met Obi-Wan and Anakin, which I feel is pretty important, because at the beginning of the Clone Wars, Obi-Wan and Anakin are talking about Ventress like she's some old nemesis of theirs, but we as the audience are missing some pretty important context. This book gives you that. We also see the political squabblings between the Republic and separatist movements in the very early stages of the war. Cato Nemoidia is targeted, and the Nemoidian people are discriminated against for being involved with the Trade Federation and everything that went down with them during the Phantom Menace. I know there are some people that don't like politics in Star Wars, but if you ask me, Star Wars has always had a strong underlying political through line, and politics in any franchise only served to make it feel like a more palpable world. So it didn't bother me in the prequels, it didn't bother me in the Clone Wars, and it certainly doesn't bother me here. And not only does this book fill in some very necessary gaps for the overarching story, but it also shows us a lot of the events that shaped these characters into who they become later on. Anakin in this book is no longer Obi-Wan's Padawan. He's now a Jedi Knight and trying to figure out who he wants to be. In this book, he takes on somewhat of a mentorship role for this youngling, Mill, who doesn't really fit in with all of the other younglings. She has much different abilities, and Anakin is able to help her channel those abilities. By the end of this book, she is far more in tune with her special abilities, which could be very beneficial to the Jedi, but she never wants to become a Jedi Knight. She believes in the Jedi, but is opposed to who they are becoming in this conflict, which are soldiers rather than the peacekeepers that they are made out to be. And you can see how Anakin's experiences with Mill prepared him for being the teacher he is for Ahsoka later in the story. We as the audience never really got to see Anakin's transition from being who is essentially a hot-headed, angsty teen into becoming the confident, headstrong leader that he is in the Clone Wars. This book shows us that. On the flip side, Obi-Wan is also dealing with his own set of issues. On Cato Nemoidia, he teams up with a Nemoidian special ops agent who has the same goal as him: to bring the perpetrators of the Cato Nemoidia bombing to justice. However, at one point he comes across some pretty incriminating evidence about the Republic and chooses to withhold that information. He's torn between his commitment to the system that he has sworn to protect and his duty as a Jedi to bring the truth to light. His decisions get him into some pretty hot water throughout this book, and I love that. They're showing how, even at this point in his life, after training a Padawan of his own and becoming a Jedi Master, Obi-Wan is still a fallible character capable of making mistakes. Of course, Obi-Wan and Anakin's different paths eventually converge, and we see how they go from the bickering master and apprentice seen in Attack of the Clones and become the jovial comrades they are in the Clone Wars and Revenge of the Sith. This book truly shows how their bond grows beyond that of teacher and student and becomes one of, as the title would imply, Brotherhood. And what I was not expecting is that this book makes for an excellent companion piece to Master and Apprentice by Claudia Gray. I didn't think they could take these two very different stories by different authors and form a cohesive story out of them. But by the end of this book, everything comes full circle, and they tied together the character arcs and themes of the stories very well, in my opinion. Before I wrap things up here, I would like to make a comparison between this book and the Obi-Wan Kenobi series from a few months back to explain why one works while the other fails. In my review of the Obi-Wan Kenobi series, I stated that it added nothing to the overarching story, and I was wrong on that count. It does add something, What it adds is a completely unnecessary plotline where Obi-Wan treks around the galaxy for a couple days and stops being depressed about Anakin by the end. All it added was a bunch of plot holes and retcons which damaged the pre-established story rather than improve it. This book adds necessary context to the story which deepens the characters' arcs and journeys with one another. This book feels like it came from a real place of love and passion for this franchise. As a matter of fact, in the author's note at the end of this book, Mike Chen states that it was an honor for him to write something within this franchise. And you can tell, he poured his heart and soul into this book, and it is on full display. The Obi-Wan Kenobi series was run by a bunch of studio executives who poorly constructed a corporate product to pander to our most primal feelings of nostalgia. With all that being said, that's about it for my review of Star Wars Brotherhood. It was a pretty great book, and I don't want to get my hopes up, or sound like my faith has been completely restored in the Star Wars franchise, because I'm still very skeptical of some of their upcoming products, particularly The Mandalorian Season 3 and anything connected to it, like the Ahsoka series, for example. But it's slowly been redeeming itself as of late. With this book, the Andor series, which has been pretty good so far, I'll be talking about that very soon, don't you worry. Tales of the Jedi is right around the corner, which also looks great, as does the Bad Batch Season 2. Practically anything animated within this franchise is excellent at this point. Star Wars might just be able to crawl its way back out of the gutter again, after the incredible failures that were the Book of Boba Fett and Obi-Wan Kenobi. But I guess we'll just have to wait and see. You guys let me know. What are your thoughts on Star Wars Brotherhood? Have you read it, or are you considering reading it after listening to my review? Did you like it? Did you not like it? Just whatever your thoughts are, please let me know them all in the comments below. And of course, as always, I hope you guys have a great day. Take care. Bye.